Thank you for joining us once again. I hope you had a lovely day. And for those of you who had to go to work, congratulations on having a job. And thank you for caring for us in the kinds of work that's essential. So last night, we had an internet bandwidth breakup, and I guess it's being reported in many places that the internet is what we call, in the technical terms, wonky. So if Chondro has arranged another camera, which you can't see here, this is on her iPhone. It's called an iPhone. It's on her iPhone that this is being transmitted, but next to it is her fancy camera. And so if we break up, that is the one that will get uploaded to Facebook and eventually to YouTube. So either way, we forge ahead, and we have quite a story here. That Siddhartha, in this portion, Siddhartha is visiting Kamala every day, and he's learning about the arts of love. And he is also working for a merchant, and he is not as careful a merchant, but he's so likable that the merchant keeps him on. So it started to break up yesterday, that is where we're going to begin tonight. I'll go back just a little bit. This is the merchant that he works for talking. This Brahman, he said to a friend, is no real merchant and will never be one. He is never absorbed in the business, but he has the secret of those people to whom success comes by itself. Whether it is due to being born under a lucky star, or whether it is magic, or whether he had learned it from the samanas, he always seems to be playing at business. It never makes much impression on him. It never masters him. He never feels failure. He never fears failure. He is never worried about a loss. The friend advised the merchant, give him a third of the profits of the business which he conducts for you, but let him share the same proportion of losses if any arises. He will thus become more enthusiastic. Kamaswami followed his advice, but Siddhartha was little concerned about it. If he made a profit, he accepted it calmly. If he suffered a loss, he laughed and said, oh well, this transaction has gone badly. He did, in fact, seem indifferent about business. Once he traveled to a village in order to buy a large rice harvest. When he arrived there, the rice was already sold to another merchant. However, Siddhartha remained in that village several days, entertained by the farmers, gave money to the children, attended a wedding, and returned from the journey completely satisfied. Kamaswami reproached him for not returning immediately, for wasting time and money. Siddhartha replied, do not scold, my dear friend. Nothing was ever achieved by scolding. If a loss has been sustained, I will bear the loss. I am very satisfied with this journey. I have become acquainted with many people. I have become friendly with a Brahmin. Children have sat on my knee. Farmers have showed me their fields. Nobody took me for a merchant. That is all very fine, admitted Kamaswami reluctantly, but you are in fact a merchant. Or were you only traveling for your pleasure? Certainly I traveled for my pleasure, laughed Siddhartha. Why not? I have become acquainted with new people and new districts. I have enjoyed friendship and confidence. Now, if I had been Kamaswami, I should have departed immediately, feeling very annoyed when I saw I was unable to make a purchase, and time and money would indeed have been lost. But I spent a number of good days, learned much, had much pleasure, and did not hurt either myself or others through annoyance and hastiness. If I ever go there again, perhaps to buy a larger harvest, or for some other purpose, friendly people will receive me, and I will be glad that I did not previously display hastiness and displeasure. Anyway, let it rest, my friend, and do not hurt yourself by scolding. If the day comes when you think, this Siddhartha is doing me harm, just say one word and Siddhartha will go on his way. Until then, however, let us be good friends. The merchant's attempts to convince Siddhartha that he was eating his, Kamashwami's, bread was also in vain. Siddhartha ate his own bread. Moreover, they all ate the bread of others, everybody's bread. Siddhartha was never concerned about Kamashwami's troubles, and Kamashwami had many troubles. If a transaction threatened to be unsuccessful, if a consignment of goods was lost, if a debtor appeared unable to pay, Kamashwami could never persuade his colleague that it served any purpose to utter troubled or angry words, to form wrinkles on the forehead, and sleep badly. When Kamashwami once reminded him that he had learned everything from him, he replied, "Do not make such jokes. I have learned from you how much a basket of fish costs and how much interest one can claim for lending money. That is your knowledge. But I did not learn how to think from you, my dear Kamashwami. It would be better if you learned that from me." His heart was not indeed in business. It was useful in order to bring him money for Kamala, and it brought him more than he really needed. Moreover, Siddhartha's sympathy and curiosity lay only with people whose work, troubles, pleasures, and follies were more unknown and remote from him than the moon. Although he found it so easy to speak to everyone, to live with everyone, to learn from everyone, he was very conscious of the fact that there was something which separated him from them, and this was due to the fact that he had been a samana. He saw people living in a childish or animal-like way, which he both loved and despised. He saw them toiling, saw them suffer and grow gray about things that to him did not seem worth the price. For money, small pleasures, and trivial honors. He saw them scold and hurt each other. He saw them lament over pains at which the samana laughs, and suffer at deprivation, which a samana does not feel. He accepted all that people brought to him. The merchant who brought him linen for sale was welcome. The debtor who sought a loan was welcome. The beggar was welcome, who stayed an hour telling him the story of his poverty, and who was yet not as poor as any samana. He did not treat the rich foreign merchants differently from the servant who shaved him, and the peddlers from whom he bought bananas and let himself be robbed of small coins. If Kamashwami came to him and told him his troubles, or made him reproaches about a transaction, he listened curiously and attentively, was amazed at him, tried to understand him, conceded to him a little when it seemed necessary, and turned away from him to the next one who wanted him. And many people came to him, many to trade with him, many to deceive him, many to listen to him, many to elicit his sympathy, many to listen to his advice. He gave advice, he sympathized, he gave presence. He allowed himself to be cheated a little, and he occupied his thoughts with all this game and the passion with which all men play it, as much as he had previously occupied his thoughts with the gods and Brahman. At times he heard within him a soft, gentle voice which reminded him quietly, complained quietly, so that he could hardly hear it. Then he suddenly saw clearly that he was leading a strange life, that he was doing many things that were only a game, that he was quite cheerful and sometimes experienced pleasure, but that real life was flowing past him and did not touch him. Like a player who plays with his ball, he played with his business, with the people around him, watched them, derived amusement from them. But with his heart, with his real nature, he was not there. His real self wandered elsewhere, far away, wandered on, invisibly, and had nothing to do with his life. He was sometimes afraid of these thoughts and wished that he could also share their childish daily affairs with intensity, truly to take part in them, to enjoy and live their lives instead of only being there as an onlooker. He visited the beautiful Kamala regularly, learned the art of love in which, more than anything else, giving and taking became one. He talked to her, learned from her, gave her advice, received advice. She understood him better than Govinda had once done. She was more like him. Once he said to her, "You are like me. You are different from other people. You are Kamala and no one else. And within you there is a stillness and a sanctuary to which you can retreat at any time and be yourself, just as I can. Few people have that capacity, and yet everyone could have it." "Not all people are clever," said Kamala. "It has nothing to do with that, Kamala," said Siddhartha. "Kamashwami is just as clever as I am, and yet he has no sanctuary. Others have it who are only children in understanding. Most people, Kamala, are like a falling leaf that drifts and turns in the air, flutters and falls to the ground. But a few others are like stars which travel one defined path. No wind reaches them. They have within themselves their guide and path. Among all the wise men, of whom I knew many, there was only one who was perfect in this respect. I can never forget him. He is Gautama, the illustrious one, who preaches this gospel. Thousands of young men hear his teachings every day and follow his instructions every hour. But they are all falling leaves. They have not the wisdom and guide within themselves." Kamala looked at him and smiled. "You are talking about him again," she said. "Again you have samana thoughts." Siddhartha was silent, and they played the game of love, one of the 30 or 40 different games which Kamala knew. Her body was as supple as a jaguar and a hunter's bow. Whoever learned about love from her learned many pleasures, many secrets. She played with Siddhartha for a long time, repulsed him, overwhelmed him, conquered him, rejoiced at her mastery until he was overcome and lay exhausted at her side. The courtesan bent over him and looked long at his face. into his eyes, which had grown tired. "You are the best lover that I have had," she said thoughtfully. "You are stronger than others, more supple, more willing. You have learned my art well, Siddhartha. Someday, when I am older, I will have a child by you. And yet, my dear, you have remained a samana. You do not really love me. You love nobody. Is that not true?" "Maybe," said Siddhartha wearily, "I am like you. You cannot love either. Otherwise, how could you practice love as an art? Perhaps people like us cannot love. Ordinary people can. That is their secret." The next chapter is Samsara. For a long time, Siddhartha had lived the life of the world without belonging to it. His senses, which he had deadened during his ardent samana years, were again awakened. He had tasted riches, passion, and power, but for a long time he remained a samana in his heart. Clever Kamala had recognized this. His life was always directed by the art of thinking, waiting, and fasting. The people of the world, the ordinary people, were still alien to him, just as he was apart from them. The years passed by, enveloped by comfortable circumstances. Siddhartha hardly noticed their passing. He had become rich. He had long possessed a house of his own and his own servants, and a garden at the outskirts of town by the river. People liked him. They came to him if they wanted money or advice. However, with the exception of Kamala, he had no close friends. That glorious, exalted awakening which he had once experienced in his youth, in the days after Gautama's preaching, after the parting from Govinda, that alert expectation, that pride of standing alone without teachers and doctrines, that eager readiness to hear the divine voice within his own heart, had gradually become a memory, had passed. The only fountainhead which had once been near and which had once sung loudly within him now murmured softly in the distance. However, many things which he had learned from the samanas, which he had learned from Gautama, from his father, from the Brahmins, he still retained for a long time. A moderate life, pleasure in thinking, hours of meditation, secret knowledge of the self, of the eternal self that was neither body nor consciousness. Many of these he had retained. Others were submerged and covered with dust. Just as the potter's wheel, once set in motion, still turns for a long time, and then turns only very slowly and stops, so did the wheel of the ascetic, the wheel of thinking, the wheel of discrimination still revolve for a long time in Siddhartha's soul. It still revolved, but slowly and hesitatingly, and it had nearly come to a standstill. Slowly, like moisture entering the dying tree trunk, slowly filling and rotting it, so did the world and inertia creep into Siddhartha's soul. It slowly filled his soul, made it heavy, made it tired, sent it to sleep. But on the other hand, his senses became more awakened. They learned a great deal, experienced a great deal. Siddhartha had learned how to transact business affairs, to exercise power over people, to amuse himself with women. He had learned to wear fine clothes, to command servants, to bathe in sweet-smelling waters. He had learned to eat sweet and carefully prepared foods, also fish and meat and fowl, spices and dainties, and to drink wine, which made him lazy and forgetful. He had learned to play dice and chess, to watch dancers, to be carried in sedan chairs, to sleep on a soft bed. But he had always felt different from and superior to the others. He had always watched them a little scornfully, with a slightly mocking disdain, with that disdain which a samana always feels toward the people of the world. If Kamaswami was upset, if he felt that he had been insulted or he was troubled with his business affairs, Siddhartha had always regarded him mockingly. But slowly and imperceptibly, with the passing of the seasons, his mockery and feelings of superiority diminished. Gradually, along with his growing riches, Siddhartha himself acquired some of the characteristics of the ordinary people, some of their childishness and some of their anxiety. And yet he envied them. The more he became like them, the more he envied them. He envied them the one thing that he lacked and that they had, the sense of importance with which they lived their lives, the depth of their pleasures and sorrows, the anxious but sweet happiness of their continual power to love. These people were always in love with themselves, with their children, with honors or money, with plans or hope. But these he did not learn from them, these childlike pleasures and follies. He only learned the unpleasant things from them, which he despised. It happened more frequently that after a merry evening, he lay late in bed the following morning and felt dull and tired. He would become annoyed and impatient when Kamaswami bored him with his worries. He would laugh too loudly when he lost at dice. His face was still more clever and intellectual than other people's, but he rarely laughed. And gradually his face assumed the expressions which are so often found among rich people, the expressions of discontent, of sickliness, of displeasure, of idleness or lovelessness. Slowly the soul sickness of the rich crept over him. Like a veil, like a thin mist, a weariness settled on Siddhartha. Slowly, every day, a little thicker. Every month, a little darker. Every year, a little heavier. As a new dress grows old with time, loses its bright colors, becomes stained and creased, the hems frayed, and here and there, weak and threadbare places, so had Siddhartha's new life, which he had begun after his parting from Govinda, become old. In the same way, it lost its color and sheen with the passing of the with the passing of the years. Creases and stains accumulated, and hidden in the depths here and there, already appearing, waited disillusionment and nausea. Siddhartha did not notice it. He only noticed that the bright and clear inward voice that he had once awakened in him and had always guided him in his finest hours had become silent. The world had caught him. Pleasure, covetousness, idleness, and finally also that vice that he had always despised and scorned as the most foolish, acquisitiveness. Property, possessions, and riches had also finally trapped him. They were no longer a game and a toy. They had become a chain and a burden. Siddhartha wandered along a strange, twisted path of this last and most base declivity through the game of dice. Since the time he had stopped being a samana in his heart, Siddhartha had began to play dice for money and jewels with increasing fervor, a game in which he had previously smilingly and indulgently taken part as a custom of the ordinary people. He was a formidable player. Few dared play with him, for his stakes were so high and reckless. He played the game as a result of a heartfelt need. He derived a passionate pleasure through the gambling away and squandering of wretched money. In no other way could he show more clearly and mockingly his contempt for the riches, the false deity of businessmen. So he staked high and unsparingly, hating himself, mocking himself. He won thousands, but he threw thousands away. Lost money, lost jewels, lost a country home, won again, lost again. He loved that anxiety, that terrible and oppressive anxiety which he experienced during the game of dice, during the suspense of high stakes. He loved this feeling and continually sought to renew it, to increase it, to stimulate it. For in this feeling alone did he experience some kind of happiness, some kind of excitement, some heightened living in the midst of his satiated, tepid, insipid existence. And after every great loss, he devoted himself to the procurement of new riches, went eagerly after business and pressed his debtors for payment. For he wanted to play again. He wanted to squander again. He wanted to show his contempt for riches again. Siddhartha became impatient at losses. He lost his patience with slow-paying debtors. He was no longer kind-hearted to beggars. He no longer had the desire to give gifts and loans to the poor. He who staked 10,000 on the throw of the dice and laughed became more hard and mean in business, and sometimes dreamt of money at night. And whenever he awakened from this hateful spell, when he saw his face reflected in the mirror on the wall of his bedroom, grown older and uglier, whenever shame and nausea overtook him, he fled again, fled to a new game of chance, fled in confusion to passion, to wine, and from there back again to the urge for acquiring and hoarding wealth. He wore himself out in this senseless cycle, became old and sick. My goodness, I feel so sorry for him. I wonder what's going to happen next. Good night. Please be careful. Much love.